Did you read it? Did you do today's reading? If you did, you're going to know why I'm asking. And I just wanted to ask that before I really start with anything. It is a rough reading today. And I'm sort of smiling because if you read it, you know exactly why I asked this question. It's a little bit brutal as we go through it. And if you didn't read it, I want you to read it first. If you are looking at this and you have never been here before and this is your first day, I'm going to say this is probably not the day to dive in, although I hate to put anybody off, but this is a really tough day, especially if you have never read your Bible before. This is going to be super doom and gloomy, and everything negative that you had thought or felt about God is going to kind of rise to the surface in this. But as everything, there is point and purpose to the way in which he is talking to the Levites and the people from Israel. And so I would love if this is your very first time. I would love if you would go back to the beginning of Exodus, or possibly go all the way back to the beginning of Genesis in order to have an easier understanding of what's going to come today. This could be a big smack in the face if you have never read this before. So this is Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. And so that's me. And I am doing a 1 year reading through the Bible. And every day I'm coming and sharing my thoughts. But my goal and what I really, really want everyone to do is actually do the reading first before you come and listen to me chat about it. Because my ideas are my ideas and they're great to me. And I love what God is revealing to me. But you might come with something slightly different, a different maybe perspective or a different takeaway, because I also talk a little bit about my personal takeaways and how it affects my life every single day, because I feel like this is exactly why we read the Bible. And it's funny, today I was sent an article on apathy and on how that's a struggling problem with Christians today is apathy, or really sort of being unconcerned or lazy about our relationship with God. And I'm asking you guys to do actually the exact opposite. I'm asking you to be really invested in who God is and invested in the gift that he gave us in his word. So I consider reading a blessing. We have gotten this gift. So if you imagine, if you are familiar with anything, if not, that's okay. But if you're familiar with anything, you would know that the Bible, what we have as the Bible, was not available to everybody all the time. We have the freedom and the blessing now that we have the entire book in front of us, and we can get it for free if we so choose. We can get it online if we want. We can have someone read it to us if we want it that way. We can have it audibly read to us. So there are so many ways and opportunities in order to read it. And instead of being more invested and involved in who God is, we're actually becoming less and less invested and involved with who God is. And there's less of a recognition of who he really is. And really, we just want him to be somebody that's easy beasy and is a genie granting all of our wishes because we think that we're pretty good. And so I'm trying to combat that, which is a really hard thing to do because uh, even myself, I'm very, very comfortable in my life. And being asked to be uncomfortable is difficult, right? It's difficult for me to do myself. Some would look at me as I'm crazy if I start being uncomfortable, and it could turn people away from me if they see that and it makes them uncomfortable. And then asking someone else to do it is a hardship, right? So asking somebody else to give a little bit more of their money, their time, their worship, their to sacrifice anything, right? Even giving up, like I have kids, so giving up the ability to control my kids and what they have in their lives, the spouses that they're going to have, and the colleges that they're going to go to, and the jobs that they're going to have in the future, and whether they do or don't follow Christ. Like I have to give that all to the Lord, and I have to wake up every morning and be okay with it and recognize that God is God and he will do with my things as he chooses because he's God. And so it's something I'm slowly coming to terms with, but yet it's a daily struggle. And then it's something that I'm trying to encourage the people around me to do. And then again, one of the reasons I'm doing this recording. So if you hear that smacking in the background, it is my dog that needs to drink water or eat a bone or do something strange every single time I'm recording. It's like when you have little kids and they need to be around you all the time. Every time you're on the phone, they need to be around you and get things from you. Anyway, enough of that. All right, so my preface was so long, I haven't even gotten to what day it is. It's day 56, and we are going through Leviticus. We are right near the end of Leviticus 25:24 through chapter 26, so all the way through the end of 26. And remember, I said that this is a tough chapter. So if you have not read it yet, please take some time, just briefly read over it, and then come back and listen to some of the things. It starts out really exciting, and then it gives a little bit of doom and gloomy. So I'm going to start out with the exciting part. So, if you guys remember from yesterday, the Lord was talking to he's talking to Moses, and so Moses is giving the rules, the way in which the Israelites are to live to be among a holy God. So this holy God is dwelling among them, and they are to live a certain way because He is holy, and He is calling holy means set apart, uniquely different. And what we know about God is He is eternal. Remember, if you guys were in Job with me, He's got no beginning, He's got no end, He is eternal, He is unique, He is set apart and holy, the most unique being that there is, right? And that is the Lord. That is one of the names that He calls Himself. So He calls Himself the Lord. And now He wants to dwell among us. He is choosing to dwell among the Israelites. I know I keep making us synonymous, and we aren't necessarily. He wants to dwell amongst the Israelites, but in order to do that, they need to become a holy people. And He makes the stipulations of what it is to become a holy person. And now, a lot of you guys are going to read this and be like, that's not right. Who is He to say what makes holy or doesn't make holy, right? Why would He do it this way? Why does this matter? Why does that matter? And we can ask those questions. And I think you can ask those questions of God as well. I think the reality that we need to come to is it doesn't matter because He's God and He is holy and unique and set apart, and He is completely different than we are. And so I think we need to settle in the fact that if He says something is holy, then it's holy. And if He says something isn't holy, then it isn't holy. And I think that we need to settle our lives around that instead of trying to make Him fit into what we believe at the time is holy or unholy. And the reason I'm saying this is because there's probably a million reasons why, but the one that just came to the top of my head was even I'm at a certain age, right? I'm a more mature woman. And when I was, my husband just sent me this thing about what makes a woman marriable, what makes her a good catch. We have both sons and daughters. What makes a woman a good catch? And 5 minutes into it, I couldn't listen to it anymore. It made me absolutely insane because what it is it's the perfect woman. It's actually the perfect human. And so it is above and beyond really what I believe that any of us are capable of doing. It's really accepting everything and going above and beyond with everything, being a partner and really not necessarily demanding anything of the other person. And I was frustrated because some of it too is maturity. I remember when I was 18, whether I was a believer or not a believer, which I wasn't, but I was 18. And so my maturity level was, I wanted everything for myself. I was extremely selfish and not at all understanding. And then God blessed me with kids and He blessed me with a husband. And so I needed to step outside of myself and become more understanding and more caring, and more doing and less accepting of certain things, right? And then I got older and had jobs, and right. So, and then we mature in that way when we're around other people. So there is a maturity that needs to be gained. And so I'm saying this because what I deemed good or bad at 18, or holy and unholy at 18, or even what I deemed holy and unholy when I first became a believer, is completely different to what I deem holy and unholy now. And so my guideline can't be the way I feel at the moment, right? Because then I'm like, well, then, 70-year-olds have their own version and 20-year-olds have their own version, and we need to cater to all of those things. And that's a complete untruth. And so what I need to do is I need to have a guideline, there's a plumb line, right? So I'm a fitness instructor. So there's this plumb line to our posture. And so I need, what is the center for me, right? And that center is truth, whether I like it or not. If my shoulders are hunched, I'm not following the plumb line of good posture, right? So my shoulders need to be set back and I need to be lifted tall. So there's a plumb line, there's truth, whether you like it or not. Whether your one leg is shorter or one leg is longer, right? That means that you're off and you got to be adjusted towards the plumb line because that's what's correct. It's the same exact thing, right? I don't know if that was the best picture, but it's the same exact thing that God is our plumb line. God says what is holy and what isn't holy. And we just say, okay, you tell me, I will listen and I will honor that because you are God. All right. So this is what he's been telling the Levites, and he's been sharing with Moses to share with the Israelite people in order for them to live in a community with him. So we have learned a lot of things about what they need to do to be in a community, what they need to do. We just finished learning about what they need to do with their land, right? Their land needs to have we learned about their festivals and then how their land has to have some Sabbath as well. Their land needs to be open, but he's going to bless them before that. And so now we're going to move on to the end of Leviticus 25. All right, so moving to the first verse in here, and we're going to verse 24. So throughout the land that you had as a possession, you must provide for redemption of the land. And so I wanted to just discuss a couple of things in here. Redemption is to purchase it or to buy it, and so what they are doing is they're buying. They're God is going to put them in this land, right? So God's going to put them in the land and milk and honey, but they're going to redeem that land. So they're going to buy that land. They're going to purchase that land. Doesn't necessarily mean financially, right? It means they're going to buy it in some way, right? God is going to provide it for them, and they're going to buy it in some way. Now, it also says that you hold as a possession. And so a possession is sort of controlling it. So it's partially owning it, but it's controlling it. And he says you're holding it as a possession. And in earlier chapters, he said the land is mine. So right now, he's going to give, I mean, they're right now at the base of Mount Sinai, so they haven't moved yet. But when they do move, he's giving them this land, but it's still not theirs. It's God's land. The Israelites are living in it. They are possessing it. So they are controlling it. They are living in it. They are building property in it. They have crops in it, right? Things like that. So they provide food and housing and all this kind of stuff. But they don't own the land. It is always God's land first. And so God will do with it what he chooses, but he's having the Israelites hold on to it. So this is God's land that he is moving the Israelites into to hold as a possession. So I know I kind of feel like I made a big deal out of that, but I think these are important words because, again, every time I read these, because I've read through the Bible a couple times, every time now I'm reading this, I keep thinking about what the future looks like. And so we haven't gotten there yet, but these words are important because we're going to hear them over and over and over again. What does it mean to redeem? What does it mean to hold as a possession, right? Who owns it and why? So these are all things that are going to come back to us, not just maybe in the next book, but all throughout, like all the way into the end, into Revelation. All right, so we're going to keep getting a taste of what all of this stuff means. So anyway, so he's redeeming the land, but God owns the land. All right, so he gives some caveats for there's going to be times where there are poor that are living among them, right? And it's going to be the Israelites. And so the Israelites, remember, they're a community. There are foreigners that are living in it, and there are others that living close. But the Israelites, sometimes the Israelites are going to fall into hard times and they're going to be poor. And if those Israelites are poor and they have to sell their land, they want their closest relative to buy that land. And remember, it's going to be like this whole Jubilee thing. They're going to buy it for a certain amount of time. And then after that certain amount of time is done, if the people get on better times, like, maybe they lost their job and then they get another job. And so they're going to redeem that land. They're going to buy that land back from the person who bought it. So, which I find interesting because it means when you buy the land, there's a point where they can buy it back from you. And so you're just holding it. So maybe the reason you would buy it is for what you can reap on the land, like so the fruits and everything that come in, recognizing that it's for a short period of time, but you don't own it and they have the opportunity to buy it back. And then in the land of Jubilee, they get it back. So there's always that 50-year Jubilee, if you remember from the last chapter, where they would get it back, where they would redeem their own land again. There's another section after that where if you live in a city, it's a little bit different. So if you live in a city and you live in a house, you have a year to, and same thing, you fall in hard times, you have a year to redeem your house. And if you can't redeem your house, then the person owns it. So this isn't an area where you get it back. And it's because it's not open land, right? So it's a house and it's not open land. God owns the land. He owns the earth. He owns the world, right? So it's not necessarily of a house. And interesting enough, he said in another house, like if you're in a house with kind of open property, you can redeem that one. So it's just the ones that are in the city. It says inside walls. So in the city, like in and amongst other places. All right. So I want to read verse 29 to you. So verse 29 says, anyone who sells a house in a walled city, so this is what I was just talking about, retains the right of redemption a full year after its sale. During that time, the seller may redeem it. And then I want to go to verse 31. But in houses and villages without walls around them are to be considered as belonging to the open country. They can be redeemed and are to be returned in the Jubilee. So again, just like I was saying, they can be given back. And then in 32, the Levite houses are always redeemable. So no matter where, and again, something that I think really fascinating. So the Levites, no matter what happens, if the Levites fall on hard times and they have to sell their house at any point when they come into a place they can, or they come into a place where they can afford it, they can always buy their property back again, right? So there's no time in which anyone else can permanently own the Levites' property. The Levites are the first sons of Israel. So the first sons own the property, right? So first sons of God own the property. It can never be taken away from them permanently. It can be taken for a time, but they always have the possibility of getting it back. And then it says, if I read verse 35, it says, you're not allowed to do this. So if it's among other Israelites, you want to help the poor, and you want to help the poor with no interest. So you don't want to have any interest on them, and no profit. So you're never profiting from your neighbors. Again, the Israelites, there are other people that live in this land. There are other people that they trade and barter with. But these people, the Israelites, those people that are their community, that are God's people, other of God's people are never to be able to profit from them, and they're never be able to charge them interest. So moving on a little bit in this section, we're kind of moving on to, again, keeping with these hard times, but moving on to slavery. So verse 39, it says, if any of your fellow Israelites become poor and sell themselves to you, you don't make them work as slaves. So again, he's segregating the Israelite people, his people. So if they fall on hard times, they've sold their house, they're still on hard times, they sell themselves. The Israelites are not to treat other Israelites as slaves. They are to treat them as guests or as hired workers. And always in the year of Jubilee, they are to be able to go back and redeem themselves, right? So they are to not, they're to be treated essentially as equals, not as sort of an under. So a person is here, and unfortunately a slave is under, right? A slave is someone that is owned, its property, and the Israelites are never to own another Israelite. So they're never to put one above the other. Now, it also says so that an Israelite might sell themselves to a foreigner. And so the Israelite is actually to make sure, I'm going to read it in chapter or in verse 53. The Israelite is to make sure that the foreigner doesn't treat the Israelite poorly. So if I read chapter 50 or verse 53, it says, they are to be treated as workers hired from year to year. You must see to it that those to whom they owe service do not rule over them ruthlessly. So not only can they not rule over them ruthlessly, they need to be sure that the foreigner doesn't rule over the Israelite ruthlessly. So they need to be responsible. Israelites need to be responsible for all other Israelites. The community is responsible for the community. Do you see there? Do you see the importance in that? Right? They are to be lifting each other up. They are to be treating each other in a very specific way because they are holy people, right? These are God's picked and chosen people. And so they're treating each other in a way that they are considered equal to each other. All right, I want to move on to Leviticus 26 because this is where it gets a little funky. This is why I asked if you read it, because all that stuff was great and interesting information, but this is where it gets tough. So in verse 1, it says, "Do not make idols or set up an image or sacred stone for yourselves, and do not place a carved stone in your land to bow down before it. I am the Lord your God." So here we go again. He's just reminding us, reminding the Israelites that they need to worship God and God alone. Anybody else that you think that you should be worshiping, you got to get rid of that. That has nothing to do with God, and you're to worship God and God alone. That actually separates you from God, and you need to be in unity with God and with the people of God, which are the Israelites. Observe Sabbath and have reverence for my sanctuary. So verse 3 says, "If you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, I will send you rain in its season." So he's talking about blessings now. "The ground will yield its crops to you, and the trees its fruit. Your threshing will continue until grape harvest, and grape harvest will continue until planting, and you will eat all the food you want and live in safety in your land. I will grant peace in your land, and you will lie down, and no one will make you afraid. I will remove wild beasts from the land. The sword will not pass through your country. You will pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword to you." Do you see what he is saying? He is saying it's a windfall. The blessings that come to you, and I'm not even going to talk about financial blessings. You are going to succeed over your enemies. You will always eat, right? Um, you will always have a place to dwell. He's going to make the land burst forth with fruit for you if you follow his decrees. I know that his decrees are extremely difficult, but if you follow his decrees, these are the blessings that he's going to give the Israelites. Now, here's the big but. So 14. Oh, I got to move over to a different page. So in verse 14, here we go. This is where it starts to get ugly. "But if you will not listen to me and carry out all these commands." So this is a very if-then section, right? If you do this, then this will happen. If you do this, then this will happen. Or if you don't do this, this will happen. "But if you will not listen to me and carry out all these commands, and if you reject my decrees and abhor my laws and fail to carry out all my commands and so violate my covenant," you, the Israelite, is violating his covenant. He is not violating his covenant. He has made promise among promise among promise, and he keeps it. The Israelite, if they do not do the things that God asks them to do, will be violating the promise between them, right? Because the promise is really between God and himself, but he has requirements of you, of the Israelite. So if you don't do, here we go, you're going to have terror. You're going to have wasting disease. You're going to plant seeds in vain. You're going to be defeated by your enemies. Horrible. If you still don't, right? Because if after all this happens, and then there's this chance, verse 18, "If after all this you will not listen to me, I will punish you for your sins 7 times over." So he's giving them a chance. He says, if you don't do, this is going to happen. Now, if you still don't do, you're going to be punished 7 times over. 7 times over. That's some serious punishment. "The ground is going to shake beneath you." And I like this, 19, "I will break down your stubborn pride," because the reason that you are not listening is because you are full of pride, because you refuse to accept that God is God and you need to do the things that he asks you to do, right? So my biggest sin is pride. So I can say fear, I can say anxiety, right? There's all these things that I can say, but the truth of the matter is I dig my feet in and I say, I'm not going to do that because of whatever these reasons are. I am full of myself thinking that I am my own king. I am my own savior. And if I can just do, then whatever I want to happen to me will happen to me, right? That is not what he's saying here, right? He's saying you have stubborn pride. You should be following me and listening to me. So he's going to break that stubborn. He's going to break that pride. "Your strength will be spent in vain. Your soil's not going to yield its crops." And then 21, "If you remain hostile towards me and refuse to listen, I'm going to multiply your afflictions." It keeps coming over and over and over again. And in verse, let's see, I think in verse 25, Verse 25, it says, I will bring the sword to you and on you to avenge the breaking of the covenant. Again, the Israelites are breaking the covenant. And I want to go back a little bit and I want to remind you that this is Moses writing this down. So this is Moses's words from God writing this information down. This was said at this point thousands of years ago. This is nothing new. This is nothing fresh. This is written down so long ago. The Israelites had this in their hand. The priests were reading this and they were following all these rules, right? And so if you see anything in the future that looks kind of sort of familiar, I want you to know that it was written down a really long time ago. It wasn't written down at the time that it happened. All right, so let me see another couple I want to read. So Israel breaks the covenant. I want to do in verse 33. So verse 33, he says, I'm going to scatter you among the, so this is, again, they're continuing not to come back and not to, they're still prideful. I will scatter you among the nations and will draw my sword and pursue you. Your land will be laid waste and your cities will lie in ruins. Then the land will enjoy itself here. So the land's going to be all alone. It's going to be by itself. And they're going to be taken somewhere else. So someone's going to take them because they did not listen. Verse 36. It says, as for those of you who are left, I will make their hearts so fearful in the lands of their enemies that the sound of a windblown leaf will put them to flight. They will run as though fleeing from the sword. They will stumble over one another, right? They will not be able to stand before their enemies. There's even a verse in here that says they will be eating the flesh of their sons and daughters, right? This goes on and on. The point is to bring them back. So if we go to verse 40, because they're stubborn people, if we go to verse 40, it says, but if they will confess their sins and the sins of their ancestors, because this could be multiple generations after, right? We don't know. They could be scattered and they could be scattered for generations. And so let's say they're scattered for 6 generations, right? And so their great, 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 great grandmother or grandfather was the one who perpetrated these things, right? The one who didn't listen. And so they were banished from their land. And so they're multiple generations. So you got to confess the sins of your ancestors, right? So we got to say, oh my gosh, God, they sinned against you. We are sorry for their sin against you. We are going to turn back towards you and follow you and recognize who you are. So in verse 40, so if they confess their sins and the sins of their ancestors, their unfaithfulness and their hostility toward me, which made me hostile towards them, then when their uncircumcised hearts are humbled and they pay for their sin, I will remember my covenant with their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Uncircumcised hearts. I think that's the first time we've heard this. Circumcision is a physical thing. Remember, on the 8th day, all males are circumcised. So what does it mean to have an uncircumcised? Means that they don't have a covenant with God. So what does it mean to have an uncircumcised heart? So circumcision is, remember, it's the covenant. It's an outward covenant. God said, I made the covenant with you, with Abraham, and then his sons and his entire household, all the males in the household got circumcised. So right now, this is my visible covenant between you and there weren't an Israelite yet, but you, a Hebrew, right? And me, God. This is your visible sign to know that you are my people, right? And so if you are not circumcised, you were cut off from your people. You are not a Hebrew, eventually not an Israelite, because you were uncircumcised and you were cut off. So what is an uncircumcised heart, right? It is a heart that doesn't follow God. There is no covenant between the uncircumcised heart and God. So that's what these people are. So once these people do these things, they have uncircumcised hearts. They are no longer following God. They have broken their covenant with God. And so they need to humble themselves, because remember, he says, I'm going to break you of your pride. They need to humble themselves and recognize that they are not God, that other things are not God that they're following, and that God is God, and they need to come under him and his power, right? And confess everything to him. Then he will remember his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and he will restore his people. So it ends on a good note. I mean, it ends on a good note because it says, for their sake, in verse 45, but for their sake, I will remember the covenant with their ancestors, whom I brought out of Egypt in the sight of nations to be their God. I am the Lord. And so once again, he will be their God. I think that this is I think this should weigh heavy on us as followers of Christ. If you are, if you're not, I love that you're listening. But if you are a follower of Christ, I think these things should weigh heavy on you for one of two reasons. I'm sure you can come up with a million reasons. Reason one, oh my goodness, is this me? Am I someone who follows some rules but doesn't follow all the rules? And I'm saying rules, I'm using it very openly. I want to hold that open in my hands. Am I someone who does some things that I know Jesus loves, but I don't do other things Jesus loves? Or I wrap some things around it and I pretend that that's not really what Jesus wants from me? Am I that person? Am I an uncircumcised heart? Do I love the Lord only a little bit? Do I love only what I love about him, but I don't love all of him as he is, right? Or another way we can look at it is is the beauty that Jesus says to us, I am the way to the Father, right? So there's a couple different ways that you can look at it, right? We can go, oh my gosh, how amazing that I was not an Israelite living in that time and having to follow all those rules in order to maintain my relationship with God. I can come to God every moment of every day and I can sit and I can have a conversation with him. Right? So I think that there's two ways to look at it. I think it depends on where you or I mean maybe both ways are good to look at it. Maybe it's beautiful to see both and to not forget that we have some things that are asked of us, and yet we have Jesus who is the bridge between God and ourselves. But I always want to say but because I want to be convicting. I don't want to leave you with good news. We have Jesus and therefore I don't have to do any of these things. The truth is we don't want to be uncircumcised in our hearts. I don't want to walk away today and say, none of that matters to me. I want to walk away and go, oh my gosh, a holy God has really, really, really high standards, right? And where is my heart in accepting that of him, right? Where is my heart? Am I circumcised or am I uncircumcised? And so I just want to leave with that sort of circulating inside your heart today. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I know that it is, again, I've said a few times today, it's a tough read. And this is where everyone kind of says like, oh, this is the mean God of the Old Testament. And I love that really super nice Jesus. And I'm hoping you guys are going to get all of that out of your head because Jesus is still God. I'm hoping the more that we go through all of this, you're going to see the connections between Jesus and God, and how firm Jesus was with his people. And if we call ourselves that, then he's just as firm with us. So if you like this, I want you to hit the like button. I want you to share it. I want you to subscribe to the channel, and I want you to keep reading. See you next time.